And we're back.
For the first time.
For the first time, the second time.
Yes. For the first time that we're hopefully not throwing away.
Right, exactly. Well, I mean, it's all, yeah, we need an iteration cycle, right?
Yes. Always build one to throw
it,
away.
It's that thing I said the first time about like founders make a podcast to market their startup. Now they have two startups. But okay, so where shall we start the first time, second time?
It depends on how hard you want to go at it. I mean, we can like kick him while they're down, and talk about the running thing if you want.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that's at least very. It's been a lot in the news. So the Ronin hack was 625 million or something like that. Hacked from the Ether bridge, and after that, I think it was today they announced a raise from Binance, or a round led by Binance to reimburse the users for the hack. But it was only 150 million raised. So is the rest coming from Sky Mavis or whatever Axi Infinity organizations?
I did not see that particular bit of news, but the beautiful thing about being able to print your own money is that you can just print more of it and sell it to people, and then you change it for ETH, I guess.
So there's a lot of people who think that these kinds of bridges are a terrible idea, and by these kinds I mean multi-sig based bridges where there's just some few people who basically control all the money in the bridge. And there are ideas that are not yet functioning in practice for how to do this without those people, using, for example, zero knowledge proofs. But that, before we get there, is going to be quite a while, because every blockchain you bridge across, like both parties need to have the cryptographic primitives necessary to validate the proofs. So for the time being, we're kind of stuck with these kinds of bridges. And a lot of people seem to think they're a pretty bad idea. So one question is it just the same sort of process as we had with smart contracts in general, where we like slowly harden them over time? Or are these multi-sig based bridges just fundamentally a bad idea?
Oof. Okay, I would like to think it's the former. we will eventually harden them over time. Frankly, if we're going to get this sort of fuck-ups, I'm happy that the largest fuck-ups are happening on effectively a Pokemon game, right? I mean, if there's a part of the industry that's going to blow up, that's one that I'm not too concerned about. And I do realize a lot of people have money into this thing, but hey, at least the damage is contained, right? And it's perhaps the best comment I saw on this is that this kind of thing is helping Ether actually become properly deflationary, because chances are that nobody's going to be able to move these things. So there is that. I do think that just a pure multisig is eminently a bad idea, right? But it's the crutch that we have right now, so meh.
Yeah. I mean, there's more value than anyone would like to admit stored on multisigs, right? So as far as I know, Polygon is still basically a multisig, at least as far as the bridge. Yeah. So I mean, every bridged asset is going to have that same security profile. I do think that we'll be able to make the actual like bridging contracts secure, and centralized exchanges manage to do private key storage properly. So, well, managed to. Not all of them have been completely hacked.
I was going to say, I know, like, what is it? FTX and Kraken are the two ones that haven't been hacked at all.
or that we know of, right?
Sure.
I'm pretty confident that every single centralized exchange has been hacked, but they have probably just had good enough security where the hacks haven't resulted in loss of funds.
Okay, so you mean they have been penetrated somehow, they just haven't been drained. Yeah, okay, that's possible.
I'm pretty sure that's true. Having run an exchange back in the days when the amount of hackers and the amounts people were able to steal were much smaller, there were still like ludicrous amounts of hacking attempts and just constant DDoSing and like botnets, and it was pretty hectic.
Sure, but the majority of people don't really seem to care as much about like, I don't know, a customer list from 3 years ago might be out there. They seem to care about, am I losing my funds? And
well, as far as customer lists, they can be pretty bad. Like I think the Ledger hack was actually really bad.
yes,
An interesting sort of tangent on the Ledger hack, or an interesting thing, is that I know of at least a few organizations who use those hacked customer information to do marketing, which is I don't know if it's like clever or just greedy. I don't
foolhardy.
know. Yeah, but I mean that is like, as far as customer lists of like, if you got a list of people who all have ledgers, or every ledger owner in the world, right? Like it's most likely that the largest crypto holders are within that group. So
yeah,
I don't know, but I'm not a fan of using hacked resources to do anything. But on this Ronin hack, I was thinking the other day, I wonder if Axi Infinity in like 10 years will be remembered as the project that brought sort of crypto gaming mainstream-ish, or as the project that tried to do crypto gaming and was hacked big time.
Interesting. Well, having spent a while in the gaming industry precisely as it was transferring from premium gaming from free to play, there's a perfectly good chance it might not be remembered at all. Like the majority of initial free to play games and games that were massive back then, people haven't even heard of. Like chances are people are going to remember the Fortnite that came a good 8 years after the free-to-play thing started. So it is perfectly possible that in the future, a lot of these things that we're arguing about are going to be footnotes.
Yeah, it's quite possible. I mean, on a different scale, right? This happened with CryptoKitties back in the day. They weren't hacked, of course. That's also because they didn't have their own chain or bridge at the time. But they were kind of lost to the pages of history, even though it was back then considered like crypto gaming's mainstream moment.
But that's not necessarily the industry's fault, right? I mean, they themselves did not do much with it. So,
well, I mean, they tried, but I don't know if you remember what happened, but basically it was like the first time that something crypto related that wasn't drugs or money laundering was like all over newspapers, and Ethereum got so congested that it just stopped functioning because of CryptoKitties. And so then they undertook the path of building their own chain so that wouldn't happen.
Yeah, and also because being able to print your own money is a pretty nice business. So that's and it's also a Rails thing. Like, we don't need to figure out what this thing is going to be used for. We're just going to building it for you and buy the money that we just printed, right? And for what it's worth, that has been a great investment, I think, for a company that was, for a venture fund that it was in that invested in them. But my point is that they did decide to abandon CryptoKitties by and large to just go print their own money.
Well, that, and then they went for the mainstream brand stuff, right? So I think looking at Dapper, if I put my like decentralization maximalist hat on, I'm not very impressed with what they've done. But then if I put my kind of what will decentralization look in the mainstream hat on, I think they've done quite a lot. So just managing to bring in NBA, UFC, these kinds of brands and give them a viable path to participate and even make money in this industry, I think will turn out to be quite important long term.
I agree. It's been a good business. I think it was the right business decision for them. But what I'm saying is that CryptoKitties was not forgotten. It was just abandoned. It's not like if we're talking not about gaming itself, but if we look at DeFi projects, Synthetics is a project of which I expected a lot more of, and it kind of fell by the wayside for different reasons. And I do think Synthetics could have been a significant project. And I do think that Synthetics need to be permissionless, right? So it had a lot of reasons to go for it. And the team, as far as I know, is still actively working on it. So that is a project that wasn't abandoned. It was just pretty much left aside by the industry because, the Lunas and other kind of took over, which is a different topic. But anyway, that's they kind of took it over. But it's not one that the company just said like, oh, now we're gonna go do social media or something else, right?
Well, yeah. So I see what you mean. But on the topic of synthetics, I think what the industry still really needs, and what they didn't really do in the beginning, at least, I'm not really sure what they're doing right now, but they should be. We need synthetics of real world assets, or like traditional financial assets, right? And that's what we need. We need stocks and things like that. And I mean, they did some of that, if I recall, or tried to, but I think to focus on like stable coins and things like that wasn't really like very necessary, and it didn't really make sense. Like, why do they need to be synthetic?
Well, arguably, one reason is because we don't really have a proper working permissionless stable coin out there, right?
What do you mean?
Are
you implying that all these algo stable coins that sometimes drop 30% in value are working or functional?
Yeah, indeed. It depends, of course, on your definition of working. and actually, I did see. I think it was a Tesla synthetic on synthetics.
Yeah,
they
there's another one I think
synthetics.
is like Mirror Protocol or something. There's a couple that are kind of trying to go in that direction, but I haven't seen anyone really like manage to grab that, and it's probably partially a regulatory hurdle, right? Because regulators don't really like it when you, yeah.
I think, frankly, I think that this is one of the reasons why I'm bearish on synthetics overall. It's because even though I think it is a piece of infrastructure that needs to be permissionless and should be decentralized, the vast majority of people, like 98% of people, actually only care about having access to the synthetic itself. They don't really care about anything else. So if FTX does a Tesla synth, they're perfectly fine with that. Like it's nice, it's convenient. They don't give a crap. They don't need to hold it on their like ledger or something.
Yeah, the only like so that well, there's an argument for why you wouldn't want the FTX version of it. Like I agree. So it makes sense, right? That someone like FTX could probably do it better than synthetics, simply because centralized custody, or like you don't even need to do synthetics, right? You could just have the actual share somewhere. but then you obviously run into all kinds of regulatory hurdles, but I don't think they're impossible to overcome, not at least in the sort of mid to long term. But then if you want to start using that stuff as collateral, for example, in DeFi protocols, I think those regulatory hurdles become very tricky. So, like, I mean, if you're going to have kind of like a synthetic in the USD sense, right? So there's some company somewhere that's holding the share, and then they give you this token that kind of represents it. It's possible that regulators will apply traditional sort of stock market regulation to those, in which case you won't be putting it into a MakerDAO CDP.
But I wouldn't consider that a synthetic. I would just consider that basically a proxy hold, because there is a share somewhere. What I mean is a pure synthetic, something that tracks the value of a real world asset, but is not otherwise attached to it. You know, and which I believe it's what FTX is doing. FTX is not doing it themselves. They're doing it by partnering with a German company that has a license for this kind of thing. And I don't believe that actual Tesla shares are involved on that, but I need to check.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited to get real world assets onto the blockchain, because I do think there's going to be so many interesting things in just applying kind of like the DeFi programmability to the traditional industry. Like, even if it comes in like limited, pretty heavily regulated form, I still think there's going to be a lot of exciting stuff that's possible. Just like the ease with which you will hopefully be able to use those as collateral or to get loans or whatever, right? And being able to like use them or multiple ones across each other, and you know, maybe this is, I don't know exactly what it's going to look like, but I'm pretty excited just to see what happens.
I agree. The problem with that is that I think the vast majority of people don't give a crap. You care, you have the experience, and you're willing to kind of like try this out and see what happens, right? I think that the majority of people just want exposure to Tesla, basically, and they don't care that much about anything else. And if they get to, I don't know, hold a Tesla synthetic, and then on top of
why
that,
does it need to be why does it need to be a token in the first place then?
But it doesn't really need to be a token. Again, if you're just doing it in FTX, it's not a token. It's just like something that says that's on your wallet, but that might as well be a Postgres entry.
Okay, so basically your argument is that FTX is just going to become like a traditional stockbroker for a new generation kind of thing.
That's one way of looking at it, yes. That either FTX or things like it, centralized services, are going to give most people what they want regarding SINs, which is just exposure. Like, you are in, I don't know, Germany, and you can't easily, Germany, they do have exposure to brokers, but like, I don't know, you're in a country that doesn't have like a local broker with local KYC. You can't open an account in E-Trade or something because you're European, like, I don't know, you're from Greece or whatever, you don't easily have access to these things. And you just want exposure to Tesla. You just go to FTX, you buy your Tesla share, now you hold your Tesla synth that on top of that, maybe you can use as collateral to long Bitcoin on a perp or something, right? So you're getting some exposure to the space without having to deal with the collateral issues on SNX, without having to go through the KYC of opening an account with a US broker. I think that the majority of people just care about that. They just care about exposure and easy access. They don't care about most of the other stuff that we care about.
That's entirely possible. But that's maybe a good segue into Terra and Luna. So you know how it broadly works, right? So you get Luna and then you burn it to make UST, and then if you switch back, it just kind of tracks the exchange rate to keep the peg. And obviously that requires, or that means that Luna holders are kind of the backstop currently for, or in fact, the Luna price is the backstop.
And fees in theory as well.
And fees in theory, yeah. Which I don't think there's anything wrong with that model per se. I don't think there's any stablecoin or any algo stablecoin out there which would survive like a drop to zero of the collateral, obviously. So I think the mechanism itself is or the mechanism itself might work. I'm still skeptical about pretty much all algo stablecoins, but this recent news that they're buying Bitcoin to, as far as I understand, a centralized company's reserve, and then a foundation's reserve that will then be used as the backstop is interesting. There's some talk of it being protocol owned at some point, but obviously that's like not at all technically possible right now and for a long time to come. So we have this interesting dynamic where if this foundation were to, like, if we had a dramatic price drop in the price of Luna, and this foundation, for whatever reason, wasn't super bullish, wouldn't you, as the financial director of this foundation, be like, maybe we don't just market buy with all of this Bitcoin and give that money to retail, but instead just keep this 3 billion in Bitcoin or whatever it is they're trying to accumulate?
I'll do you one better, because you could argue that the foundation's interests are in line with the community, right? And that's assuming up to a point that's almost borderline assuming ill intent from the foundation, right? So let's assume that the foundation is nice and will do everything they intend to. Effectively, what we're talking about here is that foundation is the backstop. A foundation is an organization registered somewhere with 3 people on a board. That means that there's a government somewhere that can come beat the foundation or the 3 people with a stick. And they can say, I'm sorry, but we're freezing your assets because reasons, right? We're going to freeze them for 6 months while we go through our research. What does this do to confidence and the actual backstop, which is by and large a trust emotional thing here, right? And second, what does that do to the coin itself? Even assuming that people's confidence is not affected by this, what does this mean if the foundation has its assets tied because of a legal or regulatory issue, and they can't liquidate it in time to actually act as a backstop?
Indeed. But I guess the question is, well, I'll pose this question to you. Do you think, regardless of all that this increases confidence in UST being able to hold the peg?
Well, it's diversification, and diversification tends to be good. So I would say that it's better than it being backed entirely by a foundation that's just holding Luna, let's say. So from that point of view, yeah, okay, sure.
There is an analogy from the traditional world where a single organization holds a basket of assets as a backstop to their currency.
Sure, I hear you.
Which, yeah, maybe we don't need to get into that, but I do find it's pretty funny how we all started this crypto thing like we're gonna completely reimagine finance, and 10 years in, turns out we've reimagined it to be not that different from what finance has looked like for a long
Well,
time.
look, quite frankly, I will say this for them, and I have been trash talking this shit up and down because I'm not too crazy about the idea of decentralized protocol with a centralized backstop, right? But I will say this for them: at the very least, the asset that they're holding as a secondary collateral is mostly a permissionless asset, right? It's not like, say, it's backed by USDC.
True. But at the same time, the asset they're holding as a backstop is one which is likely to face, I think, the most severe regulatory pressure in the years to come. But
Sure,
that
perfectly
remains
possible.
to be seen.
But
That remains to be seen.
I feel like I'm almost defending them here, but acting as a devil's advocate, at the very least, one of the huge concerns about something like Luna, that's again depending entirely on, so about USDT depends entirely on the price of Luna, is if this thing were to go down on a downward spiral, like how quickly can you liquidate this thing to hold it up, right? And at the very least, now they have an asset that they might be able to liquidate without affecting the other thing. So that, that has some value. It's still not a centralized protocol as far as I'm concerned.
I mean, but so relating to my joke about the analogy from traditional finance, even though these things suspiciously are starting to look like traditional finance, and in this case, the activities of a central bank, there is a reason for that. Like, there's a reason why traditional finance ended up the way it is. I'm still quite hopeful that they're simply because we have the internet, and when all that stuff for the traditional world was designed, we did not. I think there's going to be more things that we can do better this time, but there is a reason why it ended up like that, and being able to hold a diverse portfolio of assets, including real world assets, unfortunately requires a real world entity, right? Like, I find all these proposals, like MakerDAO has some vision of like buying land in New Zealand, and it's like,
yeah, okay, but
like, great,
going.
but there's gonna be a centralized entity that owns the land at some point in the chain, and so, like, it's just kind of how it is. And I do, while I am terrified at the systemic risk it creates, it is slightly, I say this very, very tentatively. It might be the only way in which we can integrate into sort of society and traditional finance, because, like, building an algorithmic stablecoin backed by basically speculative magic beans is clearly, like, not, I don't want to say it's not possible, but certainly anything that is so, like, at the whims of public sentiment is not a good backing for a currency that's stable and meant to be used to, like, buy stuff. so maybe this is just the way it goes. Maybe decentralization or decentralized technologies in general just become kind of like a layer on top of the real world. But what sort of feels weird about it to me specifically is that there's going to be this layer of corporate entities between the real world and the decentralized world that will be, like, vital to the whole thing functioning, on arguably on both sides. Like, there's going to be this even more systemic risk than in the traditional financial system.
Okay, I suspect that this is going to be today's topic, but the Jesus. Okay, this is going to bring out the centralization fundamentalist in me, and MakerDAO for me, quite frankly, has become pretty much a strawman argument for this. This is just a fucking joke, frankly. If I want exposure to USDC, I'll just hold my money in USDC. It's completely pointless to hold DAI if most of it is USDC on the back, right? And say what you will about the Luna thing.
So you're saying this because I don't know if people know this in general, but DAI is, to a large degree, it changes a little bit, but to a large degree backed by USDC. And this was a very controversial
that's the
decision.
check. It was like 60% of the reserves. So it means there's
I think it's a little bit
company,
less now.
Right. There's a company in the US with a switch that they can turn off if they want to. So say what you will about the Luna case, and we have said a lot about it. At the very least, eventually, it is a technological problem, but eventually, let's say that those reserves could somehow be held on chain. It's not the case right now, but eventually there's a path there. Once, it might be damn difficult. It might never happen, and I think they're gonna get beaten with a stick before we get there. For what it's worth.
I can't help myself. I need to this is the damn one Ricardo rants video anyway. So I have to comment. Decentralized custody of Bitcoin in its current form and without unbelievably dramatic changes to Bitcoin, and also a lot of innovation in something we don't even know what. Maybe multi-party computation. Maybe we just somehow figure out threshold signatures and Shamir secret sharing and whatever, and then put all those pieces together to make this perfect network. And there are some networks that are trying to do this, right? I'm not going to name them because I don't believe in them at all. But one of these networks, by the way, apparently has a massively innovative multi-party computational algorithm that, as far as I know, is still not open source. So yeah, academic achievements happening in every direction. But
and where they are by FTX?
I don't know. But doing decentralized custody in that way, maybe it'll be possible safely one day, but we're so far away from that even like saying that as a foundation, like that's what we're going to do. I don't know if they have said that or not, but it's like a ludicrous thing to build anything on, right? Like
I hear you.
That's not a vision.
I hear you, and I agree. And as I said, I think that foundation is likely to get beaten with a legal stick before that happens. But if you were asking me to bet on something, and my two choices are: the magical technology fairy is going to show up and wave its magic wand and solve all the technological problems around custody here. And that's one thing that I need to bet on. And the other one is we are going to figure out decentralized land ownership and change the real world real estate legal system. Yeah, guess which one of these two I'm betting on? I'm taking the freaking magical fairy.
Okay. That I fully agree with. I'm firmly in the boat that we are not going to solve any problems with dramatic changes to the legal environment. We're only going to do it with innovation. So that is a fair point, and it's not like it's not a crazy bet to make as like an innovator is trying to figure it out, right? I think that is actually, I shat on the people trying to do this a little bit, but I actually think like it's important. It's important to try. It's important to try. So that I don't have an issue with that. But then on the like one order further, if if you're sort of positioning yourselves as a user of this completely fictional technology, that is weird. This might be a good way to segue into the what the fuck is Saylor smoking topic.
Mr. By the Top.
Do you have a well, first of all, I'm not fully up to date with what's going on that front. So do you want to give me a quick overview of recent Saylor moments?
The latest thing was, it was I think about a week ago or so, they announced that they had acquired, if I recall correctly, $250 million worth of debt. And yesterday or the day before, the announcement came out that they had used that to buy, if I recall correctly, $196 million worth of Bitcoin. And the market proceeded to promptly crash, because that's exactly what it does every time Saylor makes an announcement about having bought. Two things struck me as weird there, and one of them we have discussed before, like exactly what is the exit strategy here, right? And the second thing that I don't get, and this is not Saylor himself, like I really don't get Saylor's exit strategy, and that might by itself, people don't think he's ever going to be able to sell them. So maybe they see this as Satoshi's coins now. But the other thing that I don't get is, why do people still get excited about this? Like $200 million worth of Bitcoin is probably a fraction of the volume that a mid-sized exchange moves in a few hours. So why is this guy buying still considered bullish at this point?
Do you want me to give you my controversial take on the whole situation?
Please.
As far as I can tell, Michael Saylor is like the white knight that has agreed to fall on his sword so that all us plebs could get rich, right? So, it seems like the strategy is basically to funnel money from the traditional markets into Bitcoin. There is no exit strategy, and so who profits is the Bitcoin holders, right? And obviously the Bitcoin holders think this is fantastic because they get exit liquidity. It's basically like Satoshi's coins, right? They're just going to be stuck, impossible to move that amount. And then
without massively affecting his own holdings,
right? And then once he has accumulated as much as he can, which I think we're already pretty near, right? Like it doesn't seem like there's that much more interest in handing him money to do this. Then we await the next white knight, right? And we hope someone else is willing to die on their sword, which then maybe actually frees Saylor from his position, right? It's like pass the parcel, or what you were talking about, the devil in the bottle, right? That's the same. It's the same thing.
Interesting. Okay, I had a bit of a more asshole perspective on this as well.
You mean this was not an asshole perspective?
No. That's actually almost a selfless perspective on it.
Oh yeah,
you know,
like I fully think he sees himself as some sort of like Jesus figure for Bitcoin.
Interesting. Might be. I mean, if you were looking,
he's
at
gonna
this
die on the cross for all.
If you were looking at this from a completely evil standpoint here, right? Like a supervillain move, let's say, and I don't think like even the multiples that they're getting on this will be worth the supervillain move for what it's worth. Right? Even in like Plan B's wildest dreams, like you would get more money by putting this on some shitcoin. But anyway, if you look at it from a supervillain move, there's at least like, let's say, three entities that we know around this holding Bitcoin, right? There's Saylor himself, who started buying early, and then he convinced MicroStrategy. And then there's this MacroStrategy thing, which is apparently a subsidiary that's also buying things. So strictly speaking, the later two moves have appreciated Saylor's own coins, right? So eventually the other two moves could be exit liquidity for him as well, right? While the other two companies still get to hold their value, which is stuck, there because they can liquidate it But anyway, even so, I think that he first started talking about having bought himself around like 7 or 8K, something like that. So even if this thing goes again to Plans B's pipe dream of 300K or something next year, then we're talking like he got what, a 20, 25x? That's not that doesn't strike me as a super villain move. So I like even the asshole interpretation doesn't make sense for me. I really have no idea what's going on here.
Yeah, it's a weird situation, and I do think that crypto is interesting because, or one way in which crypto is very interesting, or actually more accurately, the people in crypto are very interesting, is because you find a lot of people who believe so strongly that they're willing to do completely irrational things. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean, like, a lot of the people who've gotten like obscenely wealthy with Bitcoin have had to have been complete maniacs to not sell when they'd made 50 million, when they'd made 200 million, right? Like,
Yeah.
holding through that requires that you have either an obscene amount of money already, or you're kind of crazy, or you're in prison or something, right? Like that. We used to joke back in 2014 or 2015, back in like when I was running CoinMotion, that the best thing that could happen to you as an early Bitcoin investor is going to prison and not having access to your wallet. And it's kind of true, right? Like a lot of people have, like, it's not really the story anymore, but back when mining was easy, like you could do it from your laptop, there were tons of these stories where people were mining from their laptop and they had like a few thousand Bitcoin, and then it wasn't worth anything. It was just kind of like, just some random digits. And then they like ditched their
Not even
laptop.
a pizza.
Exactly. Well, it was a pizza in this one story, for back
It
in
was
those
10K
days.
actually.
Yeah. But then they'll just ditch their laptop and not think about it until they see Bitcoin on the news. And then when Bitcoin is in the news, it's, flying up, the prices, whatever, some dollars, or maybe even tens of dollars, hundreds of dollars. And suddenly they realize they have, like, well, compared to the day scale, pretty small amounts. But back then, like, I don't know, 3 million sitting on this laptop, that they've thrown out, or is like in the garage somewhere, and they haven't used it for years. And then they have a mild panic attack, and then they try to like find it, and sometimes they manage to recover and sometimes they don't. But it's one of those things. Anyway, I think the Saylor story is quite, I think it's quite funny. Like, it's one of those, one thing that he's managed to do is that he's managed to like cement himself somehow in the history of Bitcoin, or in crypto in general.
Yeah.
Which may or may not be a good thing in the future.
Hey, who knows? Maybe that's what he's going for. And again, for all we know, he's a true believer. And one of the things that kept me away from Bitcoin, besides the utter lack of privacy for a long time, were precisely the cultish qualities around the proponents. I mean, they were like Jehovah's Witness on crack. It was insane, and that should have been a sign. Actually, it was just a sign that I need to move quickly in the opposite direction. And Saylor is getting up there. Really, for a while there, I thought like, yeah, he's gonna ride this for a 5, 6x, look like a fucking genius, and then move on. And doesn't seem like he's doing that. So.
No, it doesn't, does it? But okay, we should probably move on soon. But one last angle to look at it from is like if you put yourself in the mind of a true believer, and I don't mean a true believer in like you believe decentralization, is the way or anything like that, or is better, but rather a Bitcoin maximalist true believer, as in Bitcoin will be the only thing worth anything kind of level, right?
The cultist.
Yeah, if you truly believe that, and just have no doubt, which there seem to be some people. Usually everyone sells at some point, but there seem to be some who actually believe. And for those people, it might make rational sense to just get as much as they possibly can, because they think that, it's not 10 trillion, this market. It's not, it's like 100 trillion, right? Like they'll be rulers. Market. Yeah, like they will be rulers of the world kind of thing.
Yeah, well, again, this goes back to the other option, which I thought could be a play here, but I don't think him buying at this stage doesn't strike me as that. Just to close that, I think I've told you the anecdote about when I was growing up and we went through this economic crisis in Costa Rica, where the currency lost basically 92% of its value in over 2 years. So if you were someone who were lucky enough to have your assets in dollars and your debt in colones, then now you've pretty much made it. Like, I know people who owns a pretty nice house that they paid out in cash because their debt was in colones and they had dollars assets. So I get the debt. I get him taking on debt to do this. If you think that Bitcoin is going to 5 or 10x because you're going to make a whole money on that debt. So that part actually makes sense to me, but it doesn't necessarily strike me as his strategy either, right? It doesn't strike me that he's just going for the 5x based on Bitcoin. And if you want to make that sort of money on crypto, you could do it much easier elsewhere. So I don't know, maybe he is a true believer.
Yeah, I kind of feel like he must be. But yeah, maybe we should move on. So do you want to discuss EU sabotaging crypto, or
oh, fuck me and fuck that? Actually,
I actually don't know exactly what's going on there. So there was the Mika guidance, which came out, I think, last year, which was surprisingly positive. Now, the recent EU stuff was around KYC of private wallets, right? Or like non-custodial wallets.
Transfer between unhosted wallets, yes.
Yeah. That's an interesting one. It's an interesting one. I suspect it's not going to go through as it is. But it's a.
I hope so. I'm not gonna.
Something like that is probably going to happen. I think.
Eventually, and the thing is, there is something between. To me, there's a difference between KYC at an exchange point, where, okay, I'm not gonna say that I love it, but okay, fine. Like this again, these exchanges are operating in a country somewhere, and they're gonna have to abide by that country's rules. So, and if you don't want this to be useful for money laundering, then maybe you need to apply at that stage. But if you do go out with what some of the drafts for these things were, which was effectively similar to the US version of any transfer between two wallets, you need to be able to identify the owners. How the hell do you do this when there's contracts in the middle? How the hell do you do this when you're just paying some rando somewhere using crypto because they performed the service, right? And it's easier to send them $50 over USDC than it is to just make a wire transfer and lose $20 in the process. It's
Yeah.
I don't know that to me scans, quite frankly, at not even lack of understanding anymore, but just let's try and sabotage this as much as we can, because it's going to take us 5 to 10 years to get our act together regarding the CBDC that we want.
But is this so again, I'm not familiar with the exact details, but is this gonna implicate the individual users as well as centralized exchanges, or is it mainly aimed at the exchanges? Because I know there's a lot of countries already which require some information on the receiver when you send money out of the exchange. So is that is that the structure, or is it for actual me sending money to you?
No, the draft that I saw was between individual users, basically unhosted wallets, not just exchange to unhosted wallet. But I don't want to dive into it too much, just because I haven't checked what the latest is. So.
Yeah, but I think so. Let's assume that happened with unhosted wallets, individual users. Can you articulate what the problem with that is?
Okay, suppose this example. I am adding money on Aave, right? Because I want to get some yield out of it. Is this an unhosted wallet? Do we know who that contract is? Well, let's say that contract is registered somewhere as being Aave, but is this going to be something that they legally recognize as being a known entity, right? And the second is, once I add there and is that lent to someone else, does this count as a transfer of my funds? Which is the entity that is supposed to be responsible for that outgoing transfer out of the contract in the first place?
I don't think it's money laundering is the argument is just they're trying to prevent money laundering. And don't get me wrong, I also think this will be very, very difficult to implement in practice, and it's not very wisely worded. But so I think in general, what seems to happen with crypto regulation is that regulators come up with something. Because they don't understand the technology, they sort of think about it from a traditional standpoint, right? And so whatever regulation they pass always seems to include some things that restrict too much, and then some massive missing almost loopholes, right? And the problem is the technology itself, because whatever regulation is passed, I can always program something because I can program an arbitrary thing to do something exactly in the way that I'm allowed to within that regulation. And so I think it you'll always have that kind of dynamic where the regulation is kind of crude compared to the nuance of the actual thing. But then I'm pretty sure that the market is starting to be too big for the regulators to be able to actually stop it. So we'll see what happens. But well, so I mean, I want to be right, and then you get into all this privacy stuff, which they haven't even really gone around to too much.
Was going to be my next thing. Does this make Zcash illegal? Because if we talk about,
but you can KYC the address.
You can't actually. You can't, because if I'm getting a shielded transaction on Zcash, it is perfectly possible that the shielded transaction doesn't even reveal the originating address.
Oh, not publicly. But
It doesn't matter. How do I demonstrate it when I'm audited that this came from that address? I can't.
Do you know how audits work in the traditional world? You send them a document. You tell them the addresses you sent money to, you give them the amounts, right? And then you give them whatever KYC information they need. And then they go check the Zcash blockchain. They have no idea if it's true or not, but they're like, well, okay.
Okay,
So
you're being an optimist on this, I see.
I actually think this might be. So hear me out. I don't know if this is not a completely fully formed thought, and it's possible that this is all going to be disastrous for this industry. But this might push us towards a world which functions a little bit more like the traditional world, in that not everybody knows everything that's going on. But yes, you like, at least for certain kinds of things, you need to, like, the government needs to know, and those limits are, I say need to in the sense of, like, the regulators want to know because they want to prevent crime ostensibly, or they want to, dick with you because you're going to oppose them in a future election, or whichever, end of the spectrum on the villain hero politician thing you want to go on. But if that sort of KYC structure, or at least, like, I guess it's not really KYC, but just, like, identifying who the receiver is and whatever comes about, but allows privacy chains to continue operating, which these are two unknowns, right? I think the end result will actually be quite good. And my hope is that the regulators just, like, cannot even comprehend how Zcash works, and so they just kind of don't do anything about
it. Okay, this is one of those things, and this kind of leads in also into the problem with anti-authoritarianism thing, which we can jump into right after, because we both perceive this very differently. What you're saying, if I understand you correctly, and tell me if I'm not, is that if I'm audited, I say, oh, I actually send money to this address, which I swear is Joe Bob, right? And they're going to say, like, oh, he swears it's Joe Bob, so it's fine, right?
You send them the transaction hash, you send them the receiving address, and then...
Yes, and what I think is likely to happen in this case, and this is because we perceive governments differently, likely because of our originating backgrounds, is that what if an auditor wants to beat you with a stick, right? The argument that they could make is, look, Teemu was making a Bitcoin transaction, and I can go into Chainalysis, and clicking this button, I see that what Teemu said is right. Therefore, I have proof. Whereas you send me this Zcash bullshit that I don't get to verify anywhere. Therefore, I don't know if you're lying. So I'm going to beat you with a stick because you're guilty until proven innocent.
But we're talking.
And that is the issue that I see with privacy chains.
I know, and I think so. My point of view comes more from the perspective of, I want privacy chains to exist. How do we integrate them into society and the regulatory environment, right? And in Europe specifically, in the EU, right, which is what we're talking about, I think there's a possibility to do that, because the regulators are, like, this, it's different, right? Like, if you're in Venezuela, there's all these sort of perceived social contracts between the people and their governments don't apply, but in Europe they apply more than in most places, I think. And so
in some countries in Europe apply more than most places.
But I mean, think about it from the perspective of like how most crypto tax reporting works, right? Like, you send them a CSV and you tell them what you've done. It's sort of a similar structure. And it's not even because the regulators or the tax authorities or whoever, like, that's just how they've always done it, because that's before the internet. It wasn't possible to like do it. And they slowly started automating stuff. So I think that might create there might be an opportunity to find like a good middle ground where, like in Europe, where you sort of broadly trust your government. I hope, like on average, people do. I don't know. I'm talking out of my ass, but here, like you'd be okay giving your government your information, right? This whole Bitcoin maximalist kind of view of like, I'm not giving the government anything, like that is not going to work in the next 10 years, right? Those people are going to end up going to jail, most likely, unless they're already so rich that they're beyond, global government something. And so what you need to do is you need to come up with some kind of compromise. And one compromise that I think works pretty well for like the end consumer is basically who needs to know what's going on. Not more people, the same people, i.e. the government or the tax authorities. And that's why privacy chains, right? That's like an argument for primacy chains. It's like, okay, like we'll give you the information, tax authorities, but we're not going to give it to everyone. And that's why we need privacy chains.
And I'd argue those two examples that you gave are different things. First of all, in the tax case where you're sending them a CSV, you're not just sending them a CSV, you're sending them a CSV and a check. And chances are they're happy to get money from you, right? And at some point, if they decide that they now need more money, they might look closely at the CSV. But that's a different story. The other case is an issue of control over what's going on. And on the Zcash case, they need to take you at your word that this is what actually is going on a shielded transaction, because there's no actual way that you can demonstrate it to them. So I do not expect that when given a choice, they're going to be very willing to take people at their word. So what I suspect this might lead to is that they do believe what you say about the people who need to know are the ones who know. They only interpret it differently. And the way that they are more likely to see it is closer to China's CDP with their, what is it that they call it? The controllable privacy, where basically I can hide information from you, but neither of us can hide information from somebody with a master key, which is them. So I suspect that is how they're going to interpret this. Don't worry, it's going to be a privacy coin. It's just us seeing everything.
Yeah, but so the debate here is solely around like, will it be possible to avoid a government having a master key and keep that on the individual level, right? Or on some intermediary level.
Basically, are we talking?
And I agree, and I agree that like if I were scheming a government, I would try to get the master key. Yeah, I would try to get the master key.
Or force people to use something
I hope,
where you have it.
Yeah, but I hope for whatever reason that like if there is enough sort of regulation around those things, they'll let it lie with the individual, at least for some time. But we'll see. It comes down to this whole our different backgrounds, right? I don't automatically assume my government is evil, but I'm from Finland, so whatever.
Which actually gets us to the other thing. So let's
I tend to think that governments are more incompetent than they are evil. But
I agree with that statement.
Sometimes they're incompetent and evil at the same time, and that's always very tricky to deal with.
And I assume that whenever they are faced with a situation where they may feel threatened and organizations predicated on control feel threatened when you try to take control away, then they're going to skew strongly to the thing that gives them more power, which in this case is not taking you at your word regarding the shield transaction. It is forcing you to use their CBDC if you want any measure of privacy.
Yeah. On that front, though, I would point to the incompetence argument that CBDC stuff is not happening anytime soon.
It might not happen in 5 years, it might be in 10, but the point is that they're going to make it, and which is how how this thing scans as for me, making it as uncomfortable for people to do anything but that while it gets here. We're not going to tell you no. It's going to be the European way. We're not going to tell you no. We're just going to make it fucking painful for you to do anything but what we want you to do.
You might be right. And I on the broader topic of like, should I or anyone need to like let someone know exactly who I'm sending money to? No, not really. I mean, from a government's point of view, I can understand like they don't want me to be able to send 40 million to ISIS, right? Like that's not you can argue that that should be your right if that's your money, but I would counter argue that most of society probably doesn't want you to, and so in democratic society that's just kind of how it goes. But like amounts much smaller than that, like surely there's some limit. Like how do we, like cash has been a kind of release valve for underprivileged people's financial activity, right? Like it's sort of it's like the only way in which some people might make a little bit extra money because they can manage to avoid taxes, right? Like that's probably what it is. And that's always been a part of society, and so I think removing that entirely may have very unintended consequences, and that's why I think that it should definitely, like, freedom to transact should remain at least under some amount. Well, should we just quickly discuss waves? So
I think we've beaten that dead horse enough. I mean, that seems to be like the dumb version of Terra. So
yeah, who'd have thunk a stable coin on a Russian blockchain platform wouldn't hold its peg, huh?
well, he's
Wacky.
actually Ukrainian, the founder.
Is he?
Yeah, and
I thought
one
it
of
was
the
Russian.
reasons this is people being stupid, right? But I understand that one of the reasons why it started climbing was because they started propping it up online with the long Ukraine narrative. So you were like, oh well, the founder is Ukraine. This is the way to support Ukrainian tech. Like, okay, sure, if it does it for you.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think we've maybe gone through enough of the stablecoin stuff. Well, last thing, Lightning Labs announced that they were building a protocol called Taro on top of Lightning so that people could launch stable coins. Now, I have to admit that I don't know exactly what Lightning is nowadays. Every now and then I'll talk to a Bitcoiner and they're very excited about Lightning, and then I see zero indication that Lightning is interesting at all in any other context. Just looking at the amounts of money moving compared to like anything, they're shockingly small. And also like payment channels, I think so. Lightning definitely had some cool research that they were doing related to payment channels. They had some very clever tricks for moving like money in and out of payment channels and rebalancing them, doing that sort of stuff. But payment channels always just fundamentally to me seemed like a very poor scaling method. Like, we lock up money between us two. Now we can send smaller amounts of money to each other when we could just have a generic network where we can send money to whoever without locking up stuff. Like, payment channels seem like the sort of bad first idea for what now is rollups in the Ethereum ecosystem and more widely. And I don't know exactly what this is going to create, but it seems like what they're going for is basically like the block stream sort of thing. Like, let's just start launching some tokens, and like, you know, and just the sheer just being able to launch a token should be enough, right? And now there's all this promotion around the Taproot upgrade and whatever, but it's like, okay, maybe we take this the bull case as like all the big exchanges have massive payment channels open already between them, and people need to move large amounts of money. This was the Blockstream's liquid network thesis, pretty much, which is just inter-exchange movements that need to be cheap and quick, right? But beyond that, like, it's not like you'll be able to build DeFi on this stuff. Like, it's literally just like, here are your tokens. What? And not algorithmic stable coins. We're talking stable coins like USDC, which require basically no programmability besides blacklists and asset freezing and some other basic stuff on Ethereum. But is it going to be possible on this? I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, man, I haven't really, I gotta confess, I haven't looked into what Lightning is doing. This is gonna sound dismissive and it's likely to bite me in the ass 3 years down the road. But the last time that I checked, which was like 3 months ago, there was about 1/10 of the value locked on Lightning that there was on WBTC or something in Ethereum. It was like nothing. That might be just a lack of interest in the network itself. Maybe something like this is what it needs. I have no idea. This strikes me just as basically a product targeted at Bitcoin maximalists who think that everything needs to be built on Bitcoin, and who completely disregard the power of composability and an actual developer community.
Yeah, it seems like everything coming out of the Bitcoin ecosystem, which is not necessarily, I'm not actually saying this is bad, but at least this is how I think about it, and it helps me kind of understand, is that they're traders. That's kind of like who people are building for. And because they're traders, they don't care about composability. They just want to move. They want to arb exchanges, right? It's like FTX sort of style. And maybe that's true, and that would explain things. But before you go on, I just checked the TVL, or the transaction value locked, of Lightning. It is 166 million, which means that Lightning Labs has raised about half of that in VC funding.
Yeah,
which in terms of ratios looks very different to the Ethereum ecosystem, and it has less in transaction value locked than Set Protocol. It has less than XDAI. It has less than Harvest Finance. Like, it's like at the it's like if it were an Ethereum project where TVL mattered, first of all, because in Lightning it definitely matters. It's like a network capacity thing, how much can move, because it's all locked. But if it was an Ethereum network thing, it would be like borderline relevant.
RenBTC had like 180 million, and RenBTC pretty much disappeared.
I think RenBTC still has something. RenVM, which is their like whole network, has 600 million. So, and nobody uses Ren. Nobody uses it. Nobody knows how it works.
And let me check. Strange. I'm pretty sure that they were acquired, actually.
Ren was? Maybe.
Yes, it wasn't FTX. It was Alameda Research that acquired them.
Interesting.
Yeah, it was.
I wonder why. It feels like if I was to acquire Ren as Alameda or FTX, the only reason I would do so is because I realized, which I think is probably the reason, that in fact their thing doesn't make sense as a permissionless network, but it does make sense as an institutional custody solution.
Yeah,
which is basically Fireblocks, right? And if they want their own.
Frankly, and this is the asshole interpretation again. You mentioned that they're traders. I think I wonder if this is going to be a theme where you like have the charitable interpretation, and I suspect it's not necessarily that. But there are three reasons why you would try to build this on Bitcoin. One is because you're a trader, as you mentioned. The second is because you're a cultist and you think that Bitcoin is the only thing that is going to exist and that you're not going to do or use anything but Bitcoin. So anyway, but the third thing, the third reason why you would build this on Bitcoin is because it is a market that not enough people are addressing. And since they're a cult, if you say the cult words, they're going to give you money because they have nothing else to use it on because they're not willing to spend it.
Yeah, exactly. That is my sense as well, is that if you promise to make Bitcoin better again, there's a lot of funding to be gained by doing that, which is probably the Blockstack thing. It's probably the RSK thing. Granted, these guys have been doing it for quite a while, but that's ultimately why the Bitcoin community is going to keep you alive indefinitely, even if nobody uses your stupid thing. And not that they're all stupid or anything, but like, just, you know,
your little equivalent
it's a large, it's like Saudi oil money, right? Like they need to spend it somehow.
Okay, we need to close. That was
okay. Let's wrap it up. All right.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, I can top that. See you around, man. Take care.